Welcome to another episode of my podcast. I'm sorry that it's been a while since the last episode. I was preoccupied with doing research. Um, Indeed, I have some news. I will soon have a book published. Soon, perhaps qualified in November with Heather Browning, titled What Are Zoos For? This book will be examining the ethics of zoos. You might have wondered whether they're ethically justified. Taking animals from the wild, putting them into enclosures, that seems perhaps morally dubious. Is there something intrinsically bad about putting animals in zoos? These are questions that book will address, and we'll have perhaps one or two episodes discussing it, perhaps with Heather together. But today I'll be discussing a brief commentary I've published in, I believe, 2020, together with Bryce Hübner. Let me share the screen. Here we go. So, again, just like in the last episode, before the last interview, where I discussed an animal sentience commentary, here we are replying to a target article here by Mikhailovich and Powell on invertebrate minds. Animals without spines. Think of insects, octopuses, crabs. And the question here has been for a long time in animal sentience research whether such animals could feel pain, whether they need moral, perhaps, protections, ethical, legal protections, whether we need to think about how we could protect their welfare. And we very much liked the target article. As we point out here in the abstract, we welcome Mikhailovich and Powell's call. I'll henceforth abbreviate that as M and P for Mikhailovich and Powell. The call for a more inclusive animal ethics, but we think the proposed shift towards a moral framework that privileges false positives over false negatives will require radically revising the paradigm assumption in animal sentience research. And that assumption is that there is a clear line to be drawn between sentient beings that are part of our moral community and some non-sentient beings that are not. So you can see, I published this when I was a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney, working my PhD thesis on animal consciousness and its evolution. And very much one theme of that book is that it's a mistake to draw these lines. Sentience, consciousness evolves gradually. We won't find something like a clear-cut line in the phylogenetic tree of life where we can distinguish those animals that have consciousness from those that do not. Instead, we need to think of consciousness as a more gradual phenomenon that can be more or less complex. So how do we argue for this in this commentary? Well, in a letter to William Cavendish, written in 1646, René Descartes considers the three possibilities regarding the distribution of sentience. One, to know no non-human animals are sentient, because the only plausible evidence of sentience is the use of a language to reveal an awareness of what things mean. Two, some non-human animals are sentient because they engage in non-linguistic behaviors, so flexible that they are not fully explicable in mechanistic terms. And three, all non-human animals are sentient because the cross-species continuity of biological mechanisms reveals that differences in sentience are a function of biological complexity. Like most philosophers and scientists, Descartes rejects three, arguing that it would require incorrect attributions of minimal sentience to simple organisms like oysters and sponges. He also rejects two because it would require arbitrarily stipulating what degree of complexity is sufficient to yield sentience. It could include forms of behavior that could be performed insentiently. Descartes therefore proposes accepting that only humans are sentient, and this has been quite influential in the Western tradition, with animal consciousness being for a long time even banned as a legitimate pursuit of scientific research. Now, few contemporary scientists or philosophers are likely to accept Descartes' conclusion that sentience is unique to humans. But although Descartes' a priori approach to animal sentience has few contemporary adherents, his concern to address the problem of determining the boundaries of sentience persists among animal sentience researchers today, with an enhanced focus on the kinds of states that would place an animal within the bounds of our moral community. Birch 2020, for example, contends that there's a dividing line in nature, quote, between the entities that have no experiences of any kinds and those that do, quote, end. Although he notes that, quote, finding that line and understanding how it was crossed is a challenge for evolutionary biology, quote, end, page 1288. Now, disputes about where this line could be drawn or should be drawn have recently unfolded around the abilities of fishes to feel pain. Consider Key's target article against fish sentience, which rests on the claim that fish lack the neocortical structures responsible for human experiences of pain. As Michel 2019 notes, many of the contemporaries attack this way of drawing a line, insisting on the possibilities that pain could be realized in multiple ways. Braithwaite and Droge 2016, Manzotti 2016, Seth 2016, NG 2016, Elwood 2016, Godfrey Smith 2016, and Zechner 2016, as well as Merker 2016 A, B, and C, commented 3 times on the boundary problem. So Michel concludes that we could never empirically settle the question of whether non-human animals, such as fishes, can feel pain. This reasoning, however, rests on a false premise that unless we can provide a boundary line between sentience and insentience, that there's nothing to say about animal sentience. By the way, in case you haven't watched my previous episodes on some of my papers, you can download this paper here and read along at your own pace if you so wish. So to go back here, analogous boundary line debates continue concerning many species of invertebrates, including octopuses, honeybees. You see the commentaries on Mayfair 2019 and commentaries on Klein and Barron 2016. Now, although a great deal of progress has been made in clarifying cognitive and behavioral capacities of non-human animals, the acceptance of Descartes' second possibility that there's a clear line to be drawn between sentient and non-sentient species is likely to remain ethically and philosophically dubious in this context for the foreseeable future. The distribution of cognitive traits is like a banyan tree with multiple overlapping branches, Godfrey Smith 2018. There's little evidence of a distinctive mark that would allow us to include all and only those organisms that are taken to be sentient according to our folk ontology. See Fichte, 2018. So even if data seem to suggest that invertebrates do not experience pain in precisely the same way that vertebrates do, the assumption that they are not sentient is too narrow for understanding the nature of suffering. The apparent alienness of invertebrate behavior might indicate only that their minds are different, rather than that they lack sentience altogether. So against this backdrop, Mikhailovich and Powell make a convincing case that we should re-examine the empirical assumptions and the cognitive and affective biases underlying the moral risks associated with animal welfare. Much of M&P's argument focuses on sophisticated forms of vertebrate behavior, rejecting the claim that sentience and sophisticated cognition should only be inferred where we can be certain of their existence. M&P argue instead that erring on the side of false positives is prima facie ethically preferable. Quote, the costs of falsely attributing sentience to animals are minor, while the costs of false negatives are high, because, for instance, they result in a great deal of unnecessary suffering, quote end. Although here in this footnote, we also draw comparison to the line drawing debates when it comes to embryos and thinking about when does consciousness develop developmentally. And again, here there is no clear line to be drawn. It's a mistake to think that there's a certain set point where we just have pain and before we don't. It's gonna be more gradual. And it's not so much that it's this epistemic nebulousness that we can't truly capture where sentience emerges in development, but rather that there's a general gradual process. Now, we agree with M&P here, but as Fichte 2020 rightly notes, the cognitive and affective biases underlying outdated evolutionary ideas as well as mistaken views about the capacities of small-brained animals have proved difficult to unseat. Sentience continues to be treated as a property that organisms can either have or lack. We think that one of the main reasons for this is that those working on animal sentience are committed to finding the boundary that will allow them to determine precisely where animals deserve to be treated as sentient. If so, adopting a framework that privileges false positives over false negatives is likely to require a more pervasive shift in moral phenomenology, or perhaps a return to the third possibility that Descartes ruled out, and some philosophers and scientists have pursued this endeavor. Calvo, Reber, Leon, for instance. So much of the research on animal sentience and animal welfare assumes that membership in our moral community is an all or none matter. To Descartes, it seemed a boundary could be drawn a priori. The past several decades of empirical research have demonstrated that our assumptions about where this boundary might lie are flexible. There has been a continuous updating of our assumptions to include more and more species, Low et al. 2012. As M&P argue, however, these revisions have not taken us far enough. Perhaps instead of trying to draw boundary lines, we should embrace the view that sentience comes in many different kinds. Acknowledging that sentience might not look the same in all organisms does not imply that living entities must be accorded the same moral considerations. It only requires realizing that trying to draw clear boundaries is preventing us from determining what and how animals feel, so we can treat them better. What would it mean to acknowledge the possibility of minimal form of sentience in all non-human animals, with the differences only reflecting perhaps species differences in the quality, intensity, and complexity of sentience? This would require asking ourselves, quote, how should we treat different animals who may experience forms of suffering and distress peculiar to that species, quote end. This is a complex, small problem in which possibilities of causing harm must be weighed and evaluated along the lines of commentators of Wong 2020 and Browning and Veit, however you want to pronounce my name, 2020 suggest. The future of animal sentience research lies not in drawing boundaries, but in empirically investigating what it feels like to be an echolocating bat, an infrared sensing snake, an octopus with multiple distributed ganglia, a fish with a neocortex, or an arthropod such as a spider or a honeybee. So you can already see here, very early on, I've pushed for the idea with other philosophers, such as Bryce Hübner, that we need to become much more radical in thinking where sentience arose, and perhaps gradually. So now at that time, I was quite attracted to the biopsychist view that perhaps it might be extremely basic and found maybe in even all living processes. At least as an idea that we should be open about. I no longer think that that's a plausible candidate, but it is certainly a view endorsed by people like Arthur Reber. And while the arguments I don't think work very well, there's certainly a lot of prizing sophisticated cognition going on in single-celled organisms, plants, and the like, which we should consider. But that's something perhaps for a future episode. Thanks for listening to this one. Of course, yeah, I hope you like the audio versions of these papers. Happy to hear any feedback or comments. If you like these episodes, please subscribe. The next interview, I think, will be with Peter Singer, who's, of course, one of the most influential philosophers, perhaps the philosopher with the highest impact that's currently living. And he has written a lot about animal ethics. Now, with this, I hope you have a good week. But before I forget, yeah, I hope you'll find my book interesting with Hannah Browning on what a zoo's for. Forthcoming November this year. Again, bye.